stand by if you're on the call for Black Lives Matter, Black funders as organizers. And good afternoon, everyone. This is Edward Jones, Director of Programs at ABFE, a Philanthropic Partnership for Black Communities. It is 2 o'clock, and I'd like to welcome you all for this particular Third Thursday series called Black Lives Matter Philanthropy, Black Funders as Organizers. It's a really special conversation that we're wanting to have today, and we just deeply appreciate your joining us. ABFE's focus is on improving outcomes using all the resources that we have at the philanthropic community as wants and endeavors to improve outcomes within Black communities. And this is an important continuation of our conversation that was largely focused on at our annual conference, which was in Napa, California last month, where we really brought together this discussion and helped continue this conversation around elevating outcomes and directing resources towards Black organizing. It's really an important conversation. We have some great folks that are on the line with us today to help share their perspectives, as well as to help continue a movement that actually began late last year and looking at new ways and new strategies to help folks. So we have a network of funders and professionals in the New York area that really took to heart the need and the urgency to have this conversation and to mobilize resources in the right way to really help lift up this work. So change slide, Bianca. Today we're going to have with us this opportunity to have a conversation around this issue. We also want you to join the conversation by using the hashtags that we've identified here. You can always connect with us at ABFE and hashtag ABFE, but also for this particular conversation, we invite your opinions, resources, conversation using the hashtag BLM Funders. Also, as always, we invite you to join us on ABFE at Facebook, again, Twitter. Also, you can find us on LinkedIn, and stay tuned for other resources that we will also make available to you. And our website, of course, is abfe.org. Next slide. Again, you all seen this this hashtag. It's really gained global prominence, and it's really helped move so much around the work with 3 dynamic women that we really found important in elevating the issues and addressing the challenges that we've witnessed in so many different ways. And so Black Lives Matter has really become It's become such a mantra around the world that this conversation is just that next level of discussion. So with this, we move to the next slide. Let's start to introduce you to some folks that are doing the work. And the objectives of this call, particularly, is to discuss the roles of Black funders as organizers. It's a role that is sometimes underlooked upon. It's not always recognized as an important aspect of all the work that we do, bringing one's whole self into the space of the work wherever you are. The other objective is to really provide strategies and examples of how Black funders have organized in their foundation. So you'll get a snapshot of some of this, but we also want to invite you to let us know where you are, and if you or other friends that you know of are doing this work, what they're doing as it relates to organizing within the spaces in which they work. And so through that, we will all be able to have the opportunity to really start to share opportunities for collective action. The actions are very well laid out in a piece that you'll hear more about shortly, but do know that it's really important that this work continues and it does not become something that has a short shelf life, but it's one that continues to learn and grow, and we will invite you all to be part of that. So next slide. So to that end, I'm going to first introduce you all to Tanisha McCarris, who's with the Brooklyn Community Foundation. Hello, Tanisha.
Hi Edward, hi everyone. So my name is Tanisha McCarris. I manage the grant making and programs here at the Brooklyn Community Foundation, and I've also been working to form and lead the Black Lives Matter Philanthropic Group for Racial Justice. And so with my comrades and colleagues, Alan Frimpong and Lakeisha Lewis, I'm just really excited to continue to explore ways for how Black funders need to show up for our communities and ourselves as organizers.
Thank you, Tanisha. And so, Alan Frimpong, tell us about yourself, sir.
What's going on, folks? What's going on, family? Alan Kwabena Frimpong here. My 9 to 5 is with BCT Partners, based in Newark, New Jersey. We're a project management firm that works with both the public and private sector. Much of my work is with foundations, doing technical assistance and providing us support to grantees, as well as other philanthropic institutions. I was formerly at the Community Foundation of New Jersey. I'm glad to be here on the call with both of my comrades and with ABFE on the line. After my 9 to 5, I'm also an organizer with the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement and also with Black Lives Matter NYC.
Awesome, awesome. And third in the trilogy of leaders here, we have Lakeisha. Tell us about yourself, Lakeisha.
Good afternoon, everyone. As it's been said, my name is Lakeisha Lewis. I am the Senior Strategist for Safety at the Ms. Foundation for Women. We're a national foundation supporting women and girls across the country, the oldest of its kind in the nation. And I, too, happen to be an organizer with Black Lives Matter in New York City, and just all around an advocate for race and gender equity across many issue areas. And so excited to be having this conversation this afternoon with you wonderful people, and really look forward to not only sharing but hearing how folks are able to really incorporate their whole selves in this movement work in the last couple of months.
Great, thank you. And so to that end, you can change the next slide. Why don't you give us some background, Lakeisha? I think what's really important here, and everyone, just those on the call, you'll have an opportunity a little bit later to answer questions or ask questions, and you'll have a space on the right side of your, here in the chat box, to start populating that with questions now. But I'm going to invite Lakeisha to give us a little background on how this movement got started with you guys.
Sure, thanks, Edward. So, we quickly just introduced ourselves, but essentially we are comrades, we are sisters and brothers in this work, and we are Black people. Many think that goes without saying, but I think it's really important to name that in this moment, I think that so many of us were truly awakened if we were ever felt ourselves to be in any sort of state of slumber, whether it be a deep sleep or a light resting of the eyes. Many of us would say that we had been asleep. And August 9th, when Michael Brown Jr. was killed and sort of the aftermath of that and how it played out that has brought us to this moment of uprisings in Baltimore and beyond. We don't get to separate ourselves from our community, from our ethnic identity, from those places of disadvantage from which we may come, which we may still be a part of, just because we have jobs in philanthropy, right? Just because we are philanthropic practitioners. And so we bring all of that to this, and as many of us as just Black people and our families across the country felt compelled to act and really just put their bodies in motion. In this moment of the Great Awakening, we too were stirred up. But there's always a sort of a politic, right, that's at play. And so we came together just to be able to ask the question, how are you, right? Like, how are y'all doing? Recognizing that, there's almost like you couldn't walk down the street without seeing a Black person and wanting to like hug them. And so we created a call to almost, put forth the virtual hug, like a virtual extending of arms around Black people in philanthropy to say, like, we know we're here, like, we see you, we feel you. Here's how I'm doing. How are you doing? And what can we do together? Because the next thing we want to do is get active, right? The next thing we do, my thing that comes up for us is a desire to really like move something. And what do we do in philanthropy? We move money. And so we wanted to think about, like, what does that even mean, right? What is racial justice in this moment? It seems like we've been doing so much great work and had some really significant gains. You think about, I think it was around 1970 or so when ABFE was even started and where we are now, right? I think there's so many that would say that we've come a long way and the arc is definitely bending towards racial justice. But with this moment, what questions, what new questions does that raise, right? So that's definitely just been a grounding question for us and something I think we all still continue to try and answer through our work. And so that call went to a couple of webinars, and some of the things that came up for us were that people definitely wanted to do something, not only as individuals, but that also there were some awesome foundations who had already begun to step up, who had gone into Ferguson in the aftermath of the beginnings of the uprisings there, that had started to work with folks like the Deaconess Foundation, led by Starsky Wilson, so not only just some faith-based funders, but also we had heard from our colleagues at Open Society, some folks at the Shop Foundation, and others, right? We're really starting to share what was happening there. But that we really wanted to figure out how could we go bigger, go beyond, and really activate ourselves in the field and allow for this moment to give us an opportunity to talk about how we get to hold space, right? So for those of us who may not be at the very top of our foundations, how can we support each other in having conversations with our boards, with our CEOs, with others, to help them start to realize that it's really important to fund Black-led organizing and Black communities with a very explicit racial justice lens. And so I'll pause here to read a short excerpt from the history of the Black Lives Matter movement, or the Black Lives Matter hashtag. As Edward said at the top of the conversation, the hashtag, which has grown into, I think, this call to action for all of us, was started by or created by Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi, 3 Black women. And so it's really important that we don't allow for the erasure of their names as we move forward with this work. And that we really ground ourselves in the fact that 3 Black women have carried us and gave birth to this moment that we are in. And in writing about the history of Black Lives Matter, Alicia Garza, the Feminist Wire, writes, Black Lives Matter is a unique contribution that goes beyond extrajudicial killings of Black people by police and vigilantes. It goes beyond the narrow nationalism that can be prevalent within some Black communities, which merely call on Black people to love Black, live Black, and buy Black, keeping straight and cis Black men in the front of the movement, while our sisters, queer and trans and disabled folks, take up roles in the background or not at all. Black Lives Matter affirms the lives of Black queer and trans folks, disabled folks, Black undocumented folks, folks with records, women, and all Black lives along the gender spectrum. It centers those that have been marginalized within Black liberation movements. It is a tactic to rebuild the Black liberation movement. And so that is really what guides us in this moment to look at what is it that funders can do to really put forth an inclusive racial justice agenda that is in harmony with that statement coming from the Black Lives Matter founders to ensure that we are not exclusionary in our grant making and putting, and centering cis and hetero men and boys of color within our work. And so that's a lot of what I think we've talked about, what's come out of the work, what took us to the conversation that we had in Napa, and then closing out, we drafted a letter which outlines much more of the work, an open letter to Philanthropy that is still open for signatures. So we'll talk more about what folks can do towards the end of this conversation, but definitely to sign on, to pull out pieces of the letter and share internally within our organizations, but also to allow the letter to spark conversation amongst ourselves about what we can do. So I'm going to go to the next slide. And here really lay out a little bit more of the letter. So as I said, we came together outside of this, these webinars and these calls we were hosting with, primarily Tanisha, Alan, and myself, with the extremely supportive stewardship of Eric Ward at the Ford Foundation and Bathia Carter from New England Blacks in Philanthropy, who are just seasoned professionals in the field and in the work of racial justice, to, I think, really support us in figuring out what it is that we needed to say and how it is that we could connect with each other. And, in this moment, up and down the East Coast, but then also extending to the West Coast, going across the country, and working with folks like Nat Williams with the Hill Snowden Foundation, who has an amazing white paper out that, we were writing around the same time, that folks should read if they haven't already done so. I think it's called Making Black Lives Matter. So in both the white paper and here, we call the sector to act, right? So if people are in the streets, literally while we were meeting in while we were meeting in Napa, Baltimore was burning, right? And so we know that action is definitely needed. We don't have that much time to wait. There's an urgency of now to which we must answer, right? And so we were really trying to be with our colleagues and be with each other, including, those of you who are tuned in today, to talk about what that looks like, right? And what are the shared opportunities for us to work together. While we were in Napa, Roz Lee reminded us that we get to work across our silos. So that means silos within foundations, but also foundations working with each other. And so let's come and let's have those difficult conversations. And then let's call out what it means for structural racism to be present, right? And both the implicit and explicit bias that's present in our grant making, maybe not in our portfolios, but in those around us, and then how we have to navigate those conversations that are often difficult as we are carrying the weight as Black people in the field. And what are the ways that we can support each other? And then absolutely, without a doubt, the need to support Black-led organizing, and particularly to be able to lift up the funding of women, understanding that Black women are often the least funded practitioners in the social justice movement, yet are leading the majority of the organizations who are actually putting their organizing skill into practice in this moment, and for I think a Black Lives Matter liberation body of work, if you will. And so that I think is really what leads our work, and we're looking for, I think, more in continued ways and the best practices that are coming out of other institutions on how we can do that and how we can act together, and also be informing some other people similar to Resource Generation, who just yesterday wrapped up a campaign where they moved about $1.1 million to Black-led organizing, and primarily in the South. So we really want to think about how we're stepping into this work and we're showing up as leaders, recognizing that power is not finite. It is shared amongst all of us. Just because one person or one body of people has power doesn't mean that it's taken away from the rest of us. So how do we stand in our power in this moment and lead us forward, anchoring ourselves in demands that are spelled out in the letter, as well as taking the lead from the movement, Ferguson Action, the Movement for Black Lives, and the three women that brought us to this moment. So I'm going to pause there and actually pass the conversation to my colleague, Tanisha, to take us further. So we can take us to the next slide.
Great. Thank you, Nikisha. Thank you, sis. So I'm actually going to start by talking about what does it look like for Black funders to be organizers in philanthropy by just really quickly reading the first two lines of our open letter, on which I'm hoping everyone on this call will sign once we wrap up. So I'm just going to read a couple of lines. So we say the police killings of Michael Brown and Eric Garner and the decision by respective grand juries not to bring forth criminal charges unleashed an anger and energy of Black communities across the country. Black philanthropists were not immune at this moment, and today, collectively and individually, we struggle to better understand our roles. I think it's just important there because as many of us on the call, as my comrades Alan and Nikisha, we are all organizers. But sometimes in the sector and even within our organizations, we think that we have to take our organizer hat off from 9 to 5, and then once we leave our organizations, we all of a sudden become activists and organizers again for our people and for ourselves. And at the beginning of the letter, what we're challenging ourselves to do and say is that we have to better understand our roles, and actually our roles as Black people in foundations and in this sector is to organize the sector. Because in the many ways that on the ground, when we're looking at Ferguson Action and Black Lives Matter, and all the groups and organizations and activists across the country, is that Black leadership is really necessary to bring us towards a more racially just and inclusive society and world. And so if we want a more just and inclusive sector, it's going to take Black-led organizing. And so what we are saying and calling on ourselves is the only reason why we're here is, yes, to make some good grants happen, but good grants are not the reasons why we have fought so long to be in these institutions that never wanted us, but now they have us, and now so we must organize. And so what we want to talk a little bit today is what does it mean to be an organizer in philanthropy, and then we really want to give some examples of how people have showed up, because let's face it, I mean, some of our work is really exciting, but it's really overwhelming and sometimes scary to be in philanthropy and to organize. And we're going to just talk a little bit about how to lift up sometimes the real fears and concerns that people have. And so I'll just start next by saying, so what does it mean to organize? And so we're going to go to the next slide. And so to organize, it means, so let's think about what community organizing looks like, right? It means organizing and mobilizing folks within our community, who we are, right? Our families, our neighbors, our colleagues, our partners, and mobilizing them to a direction, right? And a lot of times that takes political education, but it also takes direct action, and it takes agenda setting, right? So in both ways, we have to be unapologetic about who we are and what we're advocating for, our agenda, and at the same time, we have to be really strategic. So we've seen this happen in Baltimore, we've seen this happen in Ferguson and St. Louis, and we've seen this happen in Oakland and in cities where mobilizers and organizers are in communities doing the direct action, the political education, and organizing towards these larger policy and structural changes. We got to do the same thing in foundations. And so first, we have to mobilize within our own organization. We have to do that political education work, and sometimes we have to do that direct action. And so while it might not be a protest at the board meeting, sometimes it is, but in many cases, that direct action might be really creating opportunities and spaces for people to, one, be confronted and challenged. We've got to be strategic, but be confronted and challenged to really talk about how they're valuing all Black lives in every single thing that we do, in the grant making, in the governance, and everything that we do. And let's talk about a couple of key things that is important for organizers on the ground that should also be important for organizers in philanthropy. First is language. Oftentimes we use language that could be either dehumanizing or humanizing, right? Organizers spend a lot of time on the ground using language that is advocacy, right? And that pushes people to go towards the direction we want them to go. So in many cases, organizers in philanthropy and in foundations really struggle around language. And so the first role of Black funders as organizers is to make sure that the language that we're using is humanizing all lives, in particular Black people and Black people's lives, right? And not using language that is pathologizing. The second is really mobilizing your colleagues and doing political education, and whether that's undoing racism trainings with the People's Institute, whether it is different collectives or organizations, or even yourself, that can really lead people in conversation about what does anti-racist work really look like. But that political education is always an ongoing process. And I think one of the third things that's important for organizing is value setting. And so oftentimes people in organizations often think about the end product. Let's make sure we get some good grants out. Let's make sure that the foundation is supporting different work. But how do we make sure that our organization is actually governing itself by values that are rooted in anti-racist principles? And so things like who is making the decisions and who are we valuing in the process, and the kinds of organizations that we support are already guided by values. Some examples for how folks have organized within their own institution and in the sector. I want to highlight the Baltimore Community Foundation. About 10 years ago, that community foundation went through a process and said they have to begin to do racial justice work. They have to fund Black-led and people of color-led organizing, and they have to have larger conversations about structural change, and that means supporting advocacy and grassroots support. And so they went through a process and developed something called their REI lens, their Race, Equity, and Inclusion lens. And that was a lens that really dictated how they were going to look at their governance structures, how they were going to look at their program strategy, but ultimately look at who they were going to support and to make sure that was institutionalized. And so now that when we see the uprisings in Baltimore, that they can set up a fund that's not about fixing broken windows, right? But it's really about supporting organizing and grassroots leaders so that they can continue to address structural change. I'll also just quickly highlight the work we've done here at the Brooklyn Community Foundation. And we have just set out a journey of saying we want to do racial justice work, but what does that mean? We want to become an anti-racist organization, and until we are an anti-racist organization, we're racist, right? And so our journey is really being honest, courageously so, right? And so we set up a council and a committee of people who are going to continue to advise us on our governance, our program, and our grant-making strategy. And ultimately, if we really want to be a racial justice sector, we need an anti-racist investment strategy. So where are our resources actually invested that reflect our values and principles and aren't putting Black lives in danger? And so the third and last, before I pass it to my colleague Alan, is also the work that Resource Generation and North Star is doing. And so, as Nikisha had mentioned, Resource Generation has just raised over $1 million to support Black-led organizing. The North Star Fund is launching the Let Us Breathe Fund, and it is supporting really rapid response funding for Black-led organizing on the ground to really confront police and state violence. And so, organizing really is about, sort of one, making sure that we are really doing the political education, two, that we have the values and the language to really guide and govern our work. But also three, it takes sort of being unapologetically Black about who we are and showing up as our whole selves, because to get to the point where we can institutionalize the kinds of programs and grant-making strategy that's going to value all Black lives takes a lifelong commitment. And so organizing is an everyday job. It's a lifelong job. And we've seen just the testimonies and examples of organizations that have had Black organizers really make sure they shifted their institutions to one that could really value all Black lives in their communities and in the issue areas that they work in. And so now I'll pass it off to my colleague who's going to also share some more examples and then talk about opportunities for collective action.
And before Alan starts, I just want to remind folks, if you have some questions that are burning, please post those in the webinar, post it on the screen on your right, and we'll get to those questions momentarily. Take it away, Alan.
All right, well, we're going to go on to the next slide. Thank you for that announcement. And so I'm just going to discuss really the opportunities for collective action. And within philanthropy, when we talk about the opportunities that we've already created, we really need to think about the legacy that Black people in philanthropy have had in this nation as it was built. And even before we were thinking about the many of us that sit within a community foundation or a national foundation or a collective donor circle, we thought about the benevolent associations that many of our ancestors were a part of, that were able to support our communities locally, that already were experiencing the level of really disinvestment, lack of investment, and little to no investment post-slavery. So I want to ground us in that, to not forget that from that point to the flashpoint of the civil rights movement, when we had many of us sitting at many different foundations, Ford Foundation included, some of these smaller foundations that established much of the infrastructure during that time that allowed for the Civil Rights Act to pass, we are really moving forth in this moment when we're thinking about Black Lives Matter around how we as funders, donors, practitioners really take a stand in being possibility creators for not only the people who are on the ground doing the labor of this work and organizing, but also for our children and families, because they are organizers too. And I want to ground us in that and really thinking about the opportunities that we're creating for collective action, and also just to celebrate us during this moment. I mean, just on what? We're looking at today's the 21st, just yesterday, we can talk about the additional Rapid Response Fund for Racial Justice that has been established by a collaborative of funders. I just want to shout them out on the West Coast in California really quickly. So thank you to the Liberty Hill Foundation, the California Endowment, the California Wellness Foundation, the Rosenberg Foundation, and the Sierra Health Foundation, as they were able to work together. Some of the people which we met at the ABFE conference, who had this conversation on how to support locally led Black organizing, and really struggled through what does it really take for us to have these kinds of conversations with our board of trustees, with our colleagues, and what are the big next bold steps that we're willing to take in order to do this work strategically, intentionally, deliberately, and with the radical love and power that we all want to see happen for the changes that we want to see locally in our communities and also nationally. So with that being said, I want to be able to put forth much of the collective actions that we want to be able to do together. And again, as both of my comrades, friends said earlier, this is really an opportunity to be able to, be able to build relationships, old and new, and to strengthen them, to be able to not only work within your institution, but across institutions, because we understand that many of us who are thinking about doing this work or who have already started to roll out RFPs around this work of movement building and organizing, Black-led organizing, that we actually get to learn from each other in this moment so that we can build emerging practices that get us to the kind of movement building infrastructure that we want to see. And I want to be able to break that down a little bit for you so that you have an idea of what we really mean by that when we say movement building infrastructure, because I think, as we've mentioned during the ABFE conference in our conversations, that term gets tossed around a lot, and that many times we don't know what we're talking about. So when I talk about movement building infrastructure, in this moment, at this time, I'm also pulling from the lessons learned of what we know of how people organized during the civil rights movement as well, up until this point. And I also want to thank the folks at Philanthropic Initiative for Racial Equity who've been able to document the many flashpoints that we're seeing. But if I were to summarize all that we've been able to see in our history, I would sum it up in these 4 key points in terms of how funders have been able to leverage their investments to support work on the ground that really minimized the level of harm done to the organizers that were doing the work, while recognizing that there had to be structural policy systems changes that needed to be made, right? So the protesting is important. At the same time, the lobbying and the advocacy work that needs to get done in order to be able to make the changes happen is also equally as important. So one, there needs to be spaces for us to come together as a people and break bread. That is just part of the Black radical tradition. As family, there needs to be times where organizers need to come together. And it's also part of the absorption. I can talk about my own experience. My sister is someone who works in Wall Street. She works in finance, but as soon as Michael Brown happened, and soon thereafter with Eric Garner and the call for body cameras, her and her friends were moved to be able to sign a petition in New Jersey to call for a legislation that would take place by our local senator to really reevaluate the recommendations on body cameras. As someone who is not a quote-unquote activist, my sister felt moved to act and called upon me as her brother to be able to find out what she could do in her own way. And so those convening spaces to be able to inform and educate our own folks, our family, is very important. And it's very important to support those kinds of gatherings because it helps us reimagine, it helps us think about the ideas and the cross-cutting themes that we're seeing happening in our communities that are not new. But it gives us the new opportunity to think about how can we approach this work in a different way. The second thing is that I just said it opens up opportunities and spaces for opportunity and learning. And within the philanthropy world, we know this to be true. Even with the work that ABFE has done, and I just want to promote it, and I'm sure Ed will talk about a bit about this at the end of the call, but the work that many of us too, myself included, as practitioners of philanthropy who are consultants or who work at intermediaries, really working to center racial justice within a philanthropic institution is no easy task. It's more than a notion, right? Because again, we're thinking about relationships that are built within the culture of many organizations that have a belief around what charity means. And that's based on the system of capitalism in this country. And we have to understand that that system of capitalism is again based upon slavery and the labor, the free labor that we've been able to produce that's created this great nation, right? So there's some beliefs behind that, and those beliefs, right, grounded in white supremacy, is what has undergirded the behaviors that we see happening not only at our foundations, but within our school systems, within our police departments, everywhere. And so we have to navigate that every day. So it becomes hard for people to come out as their whole selves, right? As their full selves to be able to do that work. So the opportunity in learning here is really a piece for philanthropy that we don't want to miss. So I've said one, coming together in gathering. Two, the opportunity in learning and the support of what we're doing. Three is making sure that we have a shared identity, not only as a field in philanthropy, but also being able to come up with shared practices around how we make decisions in this work. And just because there's rapid response organizing happening on the ground, that doesn't mean that philanthropy can't open up opportunities to do that either, and we've just named some examples. So it also means we have opportunities to rapidly respond when there are moments of crisis, but it also means we get to move strategically, and I know we know how to do this as funders, to be able to say, in moments where we can see the crisis and we're looking at funding smaller projects to other innovations that we see that are promising, right, that we actually get to be able to minimize our risk aversion by then saying, here are some medium-sized grants that we can fund to the movement. And to also say we get to actually in this moment fund some longer-term sustainable funding for collective community organizing and movement building work. And lastly, part of that is also engaging in shared leadership. So what does it mean to actually cultivate that and making sure that that is supported? So as Tanisha and Nikisha mentioned earlier, we are not only just thinking about Black-led organizing, but if we really want to center racial justice, it also means, what does it mean to fund the women who have been doing this work? The Black women who have been doing this work, many of which have been in institutions that have lasted over a decade, that really have not seen the support necessary in order to do the reproductive justice work that they've been doing, the maternal and child health work that they've been doing, and to figure out and map out new ways in which they can engage communities around their own health and well-being and around their public safety. And so I want to conclude there on those 4 key points to leave people with, because it leaves opportunity for us to really think about what it means to fund the Black imagination. This is something that Tanisha and I had a conversation about 2 days ago. Like, what does it really mean? And all of the trauma that we've been faced with for centuries, how do we begin to, really not only just acknowledge, but to be able to move forth with not only the resiliency that we have, but to recognize in this moment we get to move from resiliency to think about how we can flourish and thrive collectively. Not individually, but collectively. So I want to stop there, but just really to quickly shout out that other opportunities that folks can engage in that we've been in the thinking about, and we're inviting you really into the thinking about these things, are the fact that many of us are tied to community foundations with a history that has also birthed police foundations. And I think this is an opportunity for not only just thinking about direct actions, but also just being educated, being engaged in political education around the role of police foundations with local foundations and how they've been resourcing many of the practices that have resulted in the killings of the black bodies that we see going every 28 hours. Lastly, that there is an opportunity here also to really think about those 4 key points that I laid out around what does it mean to support the gatherings, the opportunity and learning, and to have that flourish without being interrupted by criteria and standards from philanthropy, but to let activists and organizers and children and families on the ground defining that for philanthropy. And around the shared decision making, and also around how we're getting to expand leadership beyond the people who we know of who may be on these calls. So I'll stop there, and I want to be able to pass it back off to ABFE for really discussion and really to be able to open up for questions around the work that we've been doing, and just being in gratitude for being able to have this space to talk about these issues.
Well, thank you, Alan. I'm sitting here thinking you all 3 dropped the mics in so many important ways, and this felt like a religious service for me, because it's truly a revival in this energy that you all bring to this conversation. I'm reminded of a conversation that just took place a couple of weeks ago where Harry Belafonte was brought into the discussion through Susan L. Taylor and her mentoring program, and it was, again, amazing as he shared his information from, cross generations, but as you all are talking about the energy and the life that you're bringing to this work, and I know there are more folks like you, and you're calling together this notion that we really need to understand, even as you just said, Al, the idea that we need to figure out how we're going to work better collectively. It's such an important aspect of this movement, but a lot of times we do get lost in knowing who's doing what, even with so much social media going on. And I'm seeing how folks are, they're already in the conversation and tweeting with the hashtag BLM funders, sharing, and some great folks that are doing that. Could you any one of you talk a little bit about where you're finding the best kind of leverage, the best opportunities that you're witnessing as folks are coming out and talking about this, and not just talking about it, but actually moving to action? You cited some examples, but could you talk a little bit about some other things that you're seeing that you think are really important and more people need to know about?
I'll start. I think, so Alan and Nikisha and I always talk about how, and we're hearing this so much from our organizers and comrade and sisters and brothers out there, is that we can't look at this in the civil rights frame. And that's not to not honor all the work and the history that the legacy that's been created by so many of our elders. But oftentimes when we think about movements, we really feel like we have to know that 1, 2, or 3 people that are leading it and to connect with them, right? And foundations are really good for saying, well, who's leading this? Let me identify that one organization or that one community or national leader that I can tap into and support. And so what is showing up, I feel, and I think we feel in this movement, is that there is no one leader. This is about collective leadership. Leadership is literally all around you. And so there's leverage everywhere. And so oftentimes the formal institutions are not the ones that are bursting with the energy. It's those young people who no one was really paying attention to, who are out there making the world pay attention by putting their bodies and their voices and their minds on the line and showing up in resistance. And so I kind of want to just root us in this idea that we are all leadership. We are all the leverage. And as foundations, we have to resist that sort of inclination and feeling to figure out, like, we always have to know who the 1, 2, or 3 people are, or organizations are. That what we have to do is recognize that Black leadership is all around us, and we have to be there to support, invest, as Alan said, the Black imagination, which is literally in every community across the country.
Yeah, I would just follow up. I remember the story that that Pastor Starsky shared at the ABFE conference about the subversive ways in which he was able to use the funding that he got based upon the health conversion locally in St. Louis that was supposed to be for mental health services for young people. And so, and I'm not going to say this in a pejorative way around mental health services, because many of the times when we talk about the trauma in our communities, the question really should be what happened to us and not what's wrong with us. And so what Reverend Starsky did in asking the question, what happened to us, was really strategically use that money to be able to support and fund the youth-led organizing that was happening on the ground in St. Louis. And that's the kind of risk-taking that we're talking about, but at the same time, we recognize that taking the risk responsibly is really the ask and the pledge. And you can't do that without being in community and being in friendship and being in true relationship with your own folk around these issues. And so what that means is, like we're having on these calls, what we saw at the ABFE conference is really building those relationships. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to take that same risk that Pastor Starsky did, but what it does mean is you begin to think about from your vantage point, from your position, and folks that actually know this with the work that they've been doing around coaching and working with Black folks that are in philanthropy. But really, what does it mean to be in a position of stewardship? Right? And so it doesn't just mean, what does it mean to fulfill your role that is set in your job description at your 9 to 5, but how do you think through strategically? And many of us are doing this work, and I think the part that is the opportunity here is to be able to share more about the risk-taking that we've done. And even if it means sharing the failure in that risk. And for me, I'm one of those people, right? I was at the Community Foundation of New Jersey. I took a risk in funding a community engagement strategy, and it costed me a lot. But the opportunity that I learned from that was that if I had a community of people that were able to be with me around what I was trying to do, who knows? I could probably still be at the Community Foundation of New Jersey. But I share that story because it's very important that we're not saying go to your board of trustees and just say you go turn up, 100%. But what it really means is that, hey, I'm thinking about doing something that means something because it's worth it, and I get it because I'm also worth it too working at this foundation. It's not, I've arrived and I'm trying to keep my job, but it's I've arrived and I have so much power, and it's bountiful that I'm able to be in community and find the resources that I need to be able to make it happen. That's what we're talking about.
Wow, that's really powerful. The comments you guys both made. And I think, from our position here at ABFE, we hear so much around how that plays out in the space of Black professionals working in a field where there are just not as many of us. Our exit interview report that came out last year talked a little bit about that and the challenges that folks have as professionals in this space. And in response to that, a couple of things that we continue to do, and one that we introduced last year. One thing that we continue to do is have and host our Connecting Leaders Fellowship program, which applications are actually up right now through June 1st for people to submit, and it really gets to the heart of that. We've had our fellows tell us in the current and past classes about just how unique a space that's been for them to have the kind of support that you say that you would have welcomed having, Alan, and that a lot of folks feel that it's a challenge for them. Just by being in that space and not really having the networks upon which to navigate some of the challenges that exist in the field. Another really new tool that we have, and for those of you on the call, and if you want to, again, follow the hashtag BLM funders, we'll post some of these resources to you as well as post the recording and other resources after this call. But we also have introduced, just last fall, a transformational leadership program in which people can sign on and gain these opportunities to really learn how to bring their whole self into this space. A lot of times you hear and you see where people of other identifiable groups see themselves and unapologetically place themselves there, and we encourage Black folks to do the same thing, to be very unapologetic in your place and position, and also to lead from where you are. So through what was mentioned earlier, Tanisha made the comment about the idea of asking the question when people ask, well, who's leading this thing? Well, you are. If you're the person that they're facing, then you're the one that's leading it, and understand and respect that. So, again, it's invaluable. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
You know, Edward, I just want to lift up what you're saying and how important this fellowship and the programs that ABFE offers is in these pipelines, especially for Black leadership and philanthropy. I think what we have to lift up is a part of the reason why there's real fear and concern in organizing in our own institutions and in the sector is because most of us did not woke up one day and say we were going to be in philanthropy. Many of us found ourselves here and never thought we were going to be here because one, we weren't educated or informed that this was even a job opportunity, right? And so when we are here, there's and I'm just going to lift up, there's a feeling sometimes for a lot of Black folk like, oh, well, I'm not even sure I'm supposed to be here because they kind of let me in the back door, right? Like, and so sometimes we're really, really concerned with keeping our position and role in a space that can really feel really exclusive. It can really feel like there's no pipeline for entry, let alone for leadership. And so we have to just honor what that feels like. And so at some point, and I think ABFE is really leading this way, is there needs to be real entry points, formal, institutionalized entry points for and opportunities for Black folk to get into philanthropy, not fall into it or find themselves into it, but ultimately for real leadership. And so that organizing within philanthropy is a part of already that pipeline that you were a part of, so that when you show up there, you're not preoccupied with making sure you keep your job. You're prepared to know that others are coming along too. This is a place where we're supposed to be, and we're here because we're supposed to organize and change it.
So as a 2012, 2013, just want to make sure I get my years correct, ABFE fellow, I really just want to speak from the place of what it means to have community, but also what it means to be in a space where even within your work, you can take a step back for a second and figure out, like, what is my vision, right? Who am I here to be? What is the change that I am here to affect? So that it no longer becomes about me standing in this role and, you know, jumping a class, a socioeconomic class, if you will, or, you know, really holding on to my middle class values and the separation that provides me from those Black folk, that so many of us, I think, can get caught up in when we start to identify with the title or with the foundation. Some of us stay in our positions for like 20 years, if they let us. And so having that opportunity in the fellowship class to take a step back, to work with an executive coach, and to really ground myself in my vision and who I am and recenter and get a sense of self, that would allow me then to say, okay, this is the type of philanthropic change agent that I will be. I am without a doubt sure that I am able to take this bold stand in this moment because I had that opportunity. And in doing that, I got to build a network, right? I'm a network weaver, right? If you have seen me at any philanthropic conference, you know that I'm everywhere. But there's really something about knowing that you've got a core of people who are going to have your back. And the true testament to that, this year's ABFE conference, but I think 2 or 3 conferences since my fellowship, some of my connecting leaders, fellow fellows, if you will, came to me and said, so how can we hold you down? What do you need us to do? One of those is Summer Jackson. Definitely want to give her a shout out, who's over at Bay Area Blacks in Philanthropy, and has literally days after the conference went and organized funders and putting together a funders brief, but if they haven't already, have it, to talk about how they're going to move resources in California to Black-led organizing. And so your network matters. Your people matter. So no matter what, we really want to think about, I think, reconnecting to the piece that Alan lifted up around being able to find your community and find your tribe and really break bread together, but also be able to stand with each other in our visions, and to know that my individual vision is connected to a much larger one, and that my people are going to be there with me and they're going to have my back. And I'm also going to be able to access tools and resources such as coaching that's going to help propel me to the next level and be able to use my voice in a catalytic and a responsible manner.
That is powerful. Thank you for that, and thanks for that personal testimony. I always say it's time, talent, treasure, and testimony. That's really invaluable. Bianca, I know we had a couple of questions out there. You want to lift them up?
Absolutely, Edward. Thank you for that invitation. The question that I received is as follows. Has there been any thought of political action committees such as a Social Justice 527, where we can target candidates or ID them to run in local and state elections and use collective funds to overthrow laws such as Stand Your Ground in Florida to strengthen community efforts and civilian review boards around the country.
Alan, do you want to speak to some of that?
I can, and I can give you like my personal perspective on the question. I think it's one of the tactics that we can use. I think political education around elections, especially local elections, are really important. And it's actually the founding point and place where much of our work needs to happen. And so, I mean, really the statement within the question, I think as an approach is something that we should definitely think about as a strategy nationwide. But what I can speak to in terms of what is happening locally here in New York City and the New Jersey area is based around the public funding piece that I'll speak to, is really this campaign we've been doing around safety beyond policing, which so much screams to the support that philanthropy could be could be supporting here on. And that campaign really, we had an action today actually in City Hall downtown, really is asking the public sector, is really asking our local city government what it means to really think about safety beyond the current policing measures that are put in place. Nationally, since the 21st Century Task Force on Policing has been launched, there has been this conversation around what does it mean to really support and fund community-oriented policing services here nationally through the Department of Justice. And what I would say through the work that I've done with my colleagues, such as Tanisha's sister, Tanjiwe McHarris, and others who have been leading nationally in this work, is that it's a farce. We can't sit here and think locally in our communities, especially in urban communities that have seen the kinds of police brutality, misconduct, murders, lack of accountability within police departments and police unions who yield their power in ways that trump the communities in which they need to have their voices heard. It's absolutely ridiculous at this stage that we can sit here and say that these entities have more of a say of where our money gets to go, our taxpayer dollars get to go. So when you have a public system that can give $1.8 million to St. Louis Police Department for a community engagement strategy that includes hotspot policing, which we've already seen through research, it actually contributes to the disparities that we're seeing in stop and frisk practices. It's inexcusable. The fact that it even gets funded is inexcusable, and it just shows you the lack of responsibility that public funders have shown in efforts like this. And it's actually, again, an opportunity for philanthropy to start thinking about how do we work with our public sector to get them right. And in New York City, we're doing that work by saying the public system in New York City needs to be held accountable for the money it spends. We can't take $9.7 million every year and say we're going to hire 1,000 new cops. Excuse me, $97 million. Let me get my figure right. $97 million every year. That can go towards the improvement of our school system. That can go towards the improvement of our that can give, you know how many Metro cars that can give in New York City a year? So like that kind of conversation and the strategies that we're employing locally here within BLM NYC, along with the action that we did today, that was convened also with the action that we had, the National Action for Black Women and Girls. Like the fact that we can have those two actions happen at the same time is the kind of creativity we've always had as a people, right? And the fact that we're able to disrupt that meeting and be able to now follow up with city council members around why they're even considering investing $97 million in a police force that doesn't even know what it means to do community policing, quote unquote, that is the kind of work that we've been doing.
Awesome. I'm appreciating all of this. It's amazing that you want to bring such life and vibrancy to this conversation, and it's one that we know doesn't stop here. I think that last question really almost kind of serves as a teaser for the next third Thursday, which will be June 18th, in which we're going to talk about voting and Black voting matters. So, Nikisha's going to come back to us, kind of like a continued conversation with a few other folks, and we hope you all plan to join for that. But it's so important, the need for us to really think about how and where we show up at the federal, state, and local elections, because it really does start, as one person said long, long ago, that all politics is local. And until we start becoming better educated at that work and start really engaging more on not just waiting for the presidential election, but waiting for every election and being there and informed, we'll continue to see, stop and frisk laws become laws within jurisdictions. And we'll continue to see other ways that are really serving to our detriment, and not just to us as Black people, but to us as a society. So this conversation definitely continues. And I just want to take a moment to just give you all just a chance, if you want to give some closing comments as we wrap up, starting with you, Nikisha, give us some closing comments, and we'll go to Tanisha, and we can wrap us up and close us out with the Amen section, Alan.
Thank you. Well, first, I just really want to thank everyone who was tuned in for this conversation. This is indeed a labor of love and a labor of life. And so, it definitely takes all of us. And so let's keep the conversation going. The struggle continues, and we really have an opportunity in this moment to do our part to bend the arc just a little bit further towards justice. I think the last thing that I'll leave us with, Alan invoked the words and the spirit of Pastor Starsky Wilson from St. John's UCC in St. Louis, Missouri, and I want to bring him back because he is indeed my pastor. He is such an incredible being. And some of the words that he offered to us at the ABFE conference of, I think, extreme wisdom were that trustees and board members, it is your job to give cover. CEOs, it is your job to take courage. And program staff, it is your job to stay connected. And so in this moment and beyond, let us all be committed to give each other cover, to take courage, and to stay connected to the work.
That's awesome.
I'm going to close out by saying everything that Keisha just said, but we really just encourage you all to sign on to the letter. That's really an opportunity for us to really just show the world that we are together. And so as much as we talked about today, what does it mean for Black funders to be organizers, I think we are all we are family. And so I just want all of us to know that, as Nikisha just said, that we are asking folks to be courageous, to take risks, and to stay connected, so that we're all family. And the more of us that really act together, the more of us that we have to hold each other down when things get hard, but the more of us we have to really rejoice when we make our victories.
And lastly, I'm just going to keep it short. Just be love. Be love. Be Black love. I mean, as simple as it sounds, at every moment, think about the ways in which you practice love towards yourself, towards your family, and towards your community. And in getting that, because we're in philanthropy, that I've said it before, like our work is really a gift. Like the gift to be able to give is in a way that leaves us full and leaves us nourished by all of the things that both of my friends just said is just the dopest thing you could do. So I leave folks with that, and I just appreciate ABFE and the rest of the folks here on the call for opening up space for this. Thank you.
And sorry, lastly, if you haven't already signed on to the Philanthropic Action for Racial Justice, please do so. I know Edward and Bianca will provide information following, but that's how you can be encouraged.
Well, thank you all for such a powerful and meaningful, and the best hours I've spent in a long, long time. There's much more work to do, and of those that are on the call today, not only the presenters, but also those of you that are out there that are listening in, understand this is your community, and let's continue to build the community. So if you were moved and touched by this, by all means, let us know. Reach back to us. You'll get a survey. We want to hear from you. But also make plans to join us again. We will have another call next month. There'll be more information coming out. And most importantly, if you see there are some folks, these great voices that you just heard are on this list, tweet, reach out to them, find out how they're doing, what they're doing, love on them, as has been given as an example through Brother Allen. Understand that this is a movement and it continues, and we need it to grow and strengthen. So thanks to each and every one of you. Continue to follow us, continue to listen and communicate, and let's keep this movement going and growing as we look at funding and supporting an important movement that's important for each and every one of us. Have a great Thursday and a great and safe holiday weekend. Thank you.